title of page 1 is SomaVeda Noble Eightfold Path. Now, this is a derivative, if you will, of the Buddhist Eightfold Path. But it's not quite the same as what is traditionally taught, for example, in some systems of yoga. Why? Because our Eightfold Path is relative to a practical discipline of medicine and healing, which is practiced in life. Classical other forms of Eightfold Path in both Hindu and Buddhism, Buddhism being a derivative of the Hindu religion, emphasize more internal and personal experience relative to the Eightfold Path. In the Thai idea and in the SomaVeda idea, we have the internal focus, but we also have the external focus, because our practice of nobility is in cahoots with and beating and bumping up against other people. And so our practice of cultivation of nobility is in the context of an active life, engaged with other people, engaged in life. We're not withdrawing from life for a life of contemplation. In fact, we're rolling up our sleeves and we're getting dirty. We're getting out there and we're interacting with people. So we need a little bit different focus, a little different perspective on this idea of the Eightfold Path. But there's many similarities, and there would be more similarities than things that are different, but I'm just giving you the heads up that everything is not the same. Number 1 is called Yamas. Now in the book I say simply, Yamas is a good way of life. The idea of Yamas is mostly about your internal way of life versus your external way of life. For example, not expressing negativity, thinking good thoughts on purpose, generating bodhicitta. All right, these are examples of Yamas. The concept of Yamas traditionally has several different aspects. I'm going to run through those really quickly. All right, and also I want to say the word itself is translated literally as a binding or as a restraint. As a binding or as a restraint. In other words, when I'm practicing a Yamas, I am binding myself to a principle. I am binding myself to a way of being. So it also infers consciousness, and it also infers that you have the capacity to will to do. You have this capacity. So that, and actually I think later we find out that that's assuming a lot, because maybe you don't have will, maybe you don't have discipline, maybe you don't have consciousness, maybe you don't have the ability to make a conscious decision on this day and at this time that you will be now a different way than you were 5 minutes ago, and then expect that 10 minutes from now that would still be the rule. That's asking a lot, okay? But these are ideals and we want to work for them. And also, on a daily basis, these 8 things will keep you healthy every day while you're practicing. If you do all of these a little bit every day, you'll be mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, and physically healthy. Yourself, as a person, and then that's your platform to bring healing to others. Constituents of Yamas. There are 5 traditional Yamas, attributes of Yamas. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigrata. All right, Ahimsa is the practice of nonviolence. So we get the definitive statement of what is nonviolence from the Metta Sutra. And the last line of the Metta Sutra is, may I no longer participate in the origination cycle for the creation of suffering for myself and for others. So essentially that is the core concept of ahimsa. Sometimes it's stated as do no harm. But how do you do no harm? That's why I like the Metta Sutra statement better than just simply saying ahimsa means do no harm, or nonviolence. Sometimes people will say ahimsa is nonviolence. Yes, it's nonviolence, but is that sufficient to say that you will not be violent? Okay, because where does violence come from? What's the origin of violence? Okay? And there's a karmic element in all violence. And so the statement of may I no longer participate in the origination cycle for the creation of suffering for myself and for others is more fundamental than just do no harm and just be nonviolent. It's proactive. So for example, for me personally, an example, how do I no longer participate in the origination and creation cycle of suffering for myself and for others is I do healing work. It's proactive. It creates positive karma, beneficial karma. It is not violent. It is not creating harm. But it's doing more than that. It's actually creating karma which is opposite from the origination karma that creates violence. It's diametrically opposed. So doing healing work, crafting love and compassion and joy and equanimity in practical ways is in fact a way of creating metta or beneficial karma. And by definition, those things are not participating in the origination creation cycle of suffering. Okay? So the only way to be nonviolent is to not start down that pathway in any respect. And additionally, since we all have karma, and this is another teaching, we come with baggage. No one's clear. No one's hands are clean. No one's not bloodied. Everyone is dirty. And actually, I want to say this, in some religions, and for example in the Christian religion, they say we're born into a body of sin. We're born into a body of sin. Okay? I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. It meets the criteria of independent origination of karma, and then which is manifested through life. Because when you read a little bit further into these ideas, you find that it's not enough for you to be a good person now. It's insufficient to slow down the inclination to express harmful karma. It's insufficient. That we actually have to throw more in. We actually have to create positive karma. And we have to do it on purpose. And see, that's one of those things that just being a good person is not enough. You have to be a good person on purpose. There's nothing wrong with being a good person by nature, and I celebrate that, and I wish to be surrounded with people who are good people by nature. Okay? But is that really helpful in this idea of where does suffering originally come from? And the ancient teachings say no. That you want weight on that side of the scale, you have to put it there on purpose. And that's where we get into declarations and affirmations. That's where we get into, if you will, agreements. That's where we get into the cultivation of discipline. And that's where we get into way of right action, way of right livelihood, and things like that. That's where intention comes in as a counterpoint to creating suffering. All the unconscious ways that we create suffering. That's where the counterbalance is. So every action, word, or thought, or as the Tibetans say, every thought, action, and deed, okay, creates karma. And so the idea is that we bring attention to our thought, action, and deeds and see if by will, force of will, and determination, and commitment, that instead of expressing those things, we can express something else and actually generate some other kind of karma. Okay? Satya means truthfulness. Like the root word of satya is sat. Sat means truth. Just like when we come to Sakya creation principles or Samkhya creation principles in Thai, Sam, and Sanskrit, Sat, okay? They both mean truth. And that's developing honesty, avoiding deceiving others and oneself. And to cultivate truthfulness, that you work on avoiding lies and exaggerations and things that you know are not true. Another concept of satya is, in my opinion, is disclosure. Okay? In our culture we have this idea, and perhaps in other cultures too, that not telling a lie is the same as telling the truth. But according to this principle of satya, they're not the same. That actually disclosure is required. Disclosure. And it's actually better to have the disclosure and then take your lumps because you were honest, so to speak, than it is to be closeted and to withhold the truth and think that that is the same thing as not telling a lie. Because we consider these things to be two different things. Being truthful and not lying is different than not lying because you're not telling the truth. They're two different things. I want you to meditate on that for a little bit. Asteya, which is non-stealing. In fourth way teachings, we call the inclination or the tendency to steal tramp feature. Tramp feature. It's a good name for it, don't you think? That when you steal something from someone else, you're being a tramp. That's what you are. That's what that is. And tramp feature covers all kinds of little things. Tramp feature is pretending someone else's idea is yours. Tramp feature is theft by attrition. That's called I borrow something from my friend and I just never give it back. And so at some point I just act and believe as if it's mine. But if they didn't give it to me, no matter how long I've had it, it's not mine. That process is called theft by attrition. Oh, I didn't really steal the car. It was unlocked, running, and the keys were in it. That's not stealing, right? They obviously wanted someone to take it away. It is stealing. It's theft by attrition. You came to possess it without the expressed intention of the owner, however that comes about. It has to do with, in practical terms, we say things like copyright, trademark, etc. Okay? But in spiritual terms, we have the same thing. That there is an implication to give credit where credit is due. And if we own something, and we act as if we own it, it behooves us to credit the source, because that's one way to avoid tramp feature. Okay? And this could also, tramp feature could also be, for example, the way that we rationalize the defective parts of our expression of life or of our being. In other words, if I'm not being the whole good person that is my intention to be, and I'm being some other way. The process of how I rationalize that, as opposed to just owning it and disclosing it, that's tramp feature. And so every time I do the opposite of hide something I don't like about myself, the opposite, when I disclose it. Now it starts inside your head. It doesn't mean that you always have to disclose everything to everybody else around you, and the answer is no. No, you do not. But, honesty begins in your head. Honesty begins in your head. And you have to practice allowing yourself to speak the truth about yourself in your head first. And then eventually, you'll notice that sometimes something true escapes your mouth. And when people give you a true and authentic reflection of yourself, and we go into denial and judgment and defensiveness, in other words, trying to prove that obviously they don't see what they see. Are you going to believe your lying eyes or what I tell you? And every time we engage in that, that's tramp feature, and that's not austia. That's not the cultivation of truthfulness. It's something else. Now, it's a high standard. It's a really high standard. Okay? But like I said, these are ideals. And so we want to have a little bit of these qualities every single day. A little bit of disclosure, a little bit of truthfulness, a little bit of owning something that ordinarily I'd like to hide or justify, explain away, so I would not be under scrutiny or what have you. It also has to do with holding agreements. And then noting when we don't. And we make agreements with ourselves in our head all the time, and we don't keep them. We make agreements with each other all the time, and we don't keep them. And if it's ever pointed out, the first thing that we do is identify and justify and try and explain it away that maybe I meant something else, and it was conditional, and we try to do something. It's called wiggle. We try to wiggle out of it. Okay? Well, asya is a practice of not wiggling out of it, even inside your own head. Even inside your own head. When that voice, which we call your conscience, our conscience, the still small voice of the emotional realization of a truth about us. That's our conscience, okay? When it speaks to us, what we want to try and practice is whatever part of us is trying to get away, nail it and not let it get away. And at least start trying to practice honesty and disclosure and integrity about yourself. At least do this within the privacy of your own head. Because if we lie to ourselves, we will absolutely always lie to everyone else. And we will also lie about everything else. And so this principle of asya is, it's a foundational principle, because if you practice this truthfulness, cultivation of truthfulness, avoidance of identification and defensiveness and justification, practicing disclosure, practicing keeping agreements, and so on and so forth. What these things do is they create a foundation for being that's relatively solid. And then also relatively clear. So from that point of view, you're stable in the events that happen to you, and you can see them more clearly because your internal milieu, your internal world is not clouded and obscured with all junk. Okay? Astia, we were talking about non-stealing, misappropriation of any material or non-material thing. Such as, for example, one of the ones that took me a while to sort out because I was identified with it and I was justifying it, was acceptance of undeserved praise. In other words, when you get kudos that really inside you don't really deserve. Okay? And it doesn't mean not to be gracious, because a lot of times people will praise you or give you gratitude and so on. It's a very genuine expression from them. But if you're getting praise or gratitude for something you didn't actually do, you should be clear about that, at least within your own head. It doesn't necessarily mean that you be depreciating and telling everybody that you don't deserve what they're trying to give you, because that also comes across as being a little bit ingenuine and insincere. Okay? But mostly I'm talking about inside of your head. Brahmacharya is control of appetites. Now that's an interesting one to me, because we're nothing but appetites. There's no part of us that's not appetites. In fact, I think that's part of what the many eyes are. That each of the different eyes that are psychological aggregates that are within us, are personality aggregates. Actually, many of them express appetite, craving, appetite. And this has to do with food. This has to do with space. This has to do with anything that you think you need. This has to do with sex. This has to do with hoarding, if you want to say it that way. Okay? Hoarding is on one end of the spectrum, okay? And control of appetites at the other. Zen philosophy, if you were to think about Zen meditation and Zen philosophy and so on, has this idea of reducing to the most essential. And they really stress simplicity and the elegance of singularities and the elegance of simplicity. They really stress that. Okay? Why? Because that is a treatment for out of control appetites. That's a treatment for it. Aparigrata has to do with non-grasping. To avoid the accumulation of unnecessary possessions, its purpose is to become free, not from possessions themselves, but from the attachment of them, so one is unaffected by their loss or gain and being able to let go. So, for example, many monks take vows of chastity and charity. Okay? You've probably heard that, I'm sure. But what is the vow of charity about? It's about non-attachment to possessions and things. Non-attachment to possessions and things. Now you can take a vow of charity and give away everything you own and never own anything else ever again. In the Thai way, this is essentially what one does when one becomes a monk. And you're literally stripped naked, your body is shaven, your head is shaven, your whole body is shaven. So you don't even have hair on your body, much less clothes. And then from that point forward, the only thing you own is what someone gives you. And that's a loaner. You don't really own it. So, for example, all the monks, they don't buy their robes. They don't go into the monk store, monk Kmart, and buy their robes and buy their begging bowls. And, do you have a bigger begging bowl? I'd like one with a really deep bottom. Do you have one with the new ergonomic shoulder strap with the wide cushions shoulder strap so I can carry more stuff for longer in my begging bowl? And do you have wash and wear robes? I'm kind of, how about microfiber? It seems like that would make a much nicer robe in the summertime, and I like those. They don't do that. They basically, the public donates the robes as a gift, and they just get what they're given. And when those wear out, they just hope that somebody notices and gives them a new robe. Okay? And so, but this is a practice of aparigrata and the idea of non-grasping and non-possessiveness. Okay? But really what we're looking for is relief from the attachment thereof, attachment to things. Now, what's a concrete practice we can do to cultivate this self? We're not monks, and we're not taking vows of poverty. In fact, some of us have already been in the poverty part for a long time, and we're actually trying to take vows of prosperity versus vows of poverty. Okay? But how can you have a vow of prosperity and practice non-grasping and non-attachment all at the same time? Well, one of the ways to do it that really is effective is to practice generosity. Practice generosity. Spontaneous acts of human kindness and generosity. In other words, overall, you want to look at the end of your day and say, ask yourself a question: have I given more than I have received? It's a real simple question. have I given more than I have received. Because there is a universal law of reciprocity. And if you want more, but without the attachment that goes with craving and grasping, the way to get more is to give away, is to be generous. And when we're generous, then we do get something, but it's not ever what we think it is. But it's always good. Might never be what we think it is, but it's always good. So the active generosity is a practice of yamas. All right, let's move on to niyama. Niyama is a good way of life external. Basically, it's the practical expression of love, the idea of bringing love into the world in concrete terms. Practicing external consideration, the use of prayers and chants and mantras, study and charity, and doing good things, and again, practicing generosity. Okay? So generosity, this idea of expressing and practicing generosity, is both a yama and a niyama. So that's pretty cool, I think. It covers several categories. But practicing external consideration, excuse me, pardon me, no, please, you go before me, beauty before beast. But those are little considerations. Practice external consideration. For example, if you practice external consideration when you're driving on the highway, which is something I really try to be mindful of, okay? If someone looks like they want to cut in front of me, you know what I do? I let them. I give it to them. I consider them. I say, you obviously feel you need to be in this space more than I do. So, take it. Go ahead. Let people in line. And I know that's like a crime. If you're waiting for, I guess, for a movie or for theater tickets or something, boy, or a baseball game, somebody breaks in line. Whoa. Oh, people have died. Literally lost their life because someone wouldn't let them in line, or because they wanted in line so badly. If either one of those people were practicing external consideration, instead of creating violence, having a violent outcome and hurt feelings and loss of life or limb, generations of trauma now passed on to survivors and children because so-and-so wanted in line and so-and-so did not want them in the line. Some variation of that, or road rage, which happened in Chicago, a road rage incident where a family of 9, a Protestant, a preacher and his wife and 7 children died in a fiery car crash because an individual thought they had cut them off, their minivan had cut them off from changing lanes on the expressway, and so that driver forced them to crash their car, which burst into flames and killed the whole family. And you can imagine how pitiful it was, because the person who did this, of course, survived and was caught, as they were trying to explain, well, I got mad because they changed lanes too abruptly. And how little that story holds as justification. But how do you get there? See, that person was in a state of non-generosity, not practicing niyama, long before the incident. Because, see, the grasping, the competitiveness, the violence is automatic. Literally happening faster than thought, because that is the habit. The habitual response is the first gasp, first response that you have, first blush of a response that you have before reconsideration. And that first response is actually the one that defines your level of practice or previous discipline in history. Because if you've been practicing, your first response will not be to do a bad thing. And then you have to hold back. Change tactics. Now that's good, if you can. But I'm just saying, it's a thermometer. If your first response is to do harm, then you haven't been practicing. That's what that means. Even if you catch it, nobody notices. Om. All right, Niyamas have several specific kinds of attributes. They're Sauca, or purity, Santosha, or commitment, Tapas, or austerity, Swadhyaya, or study, and Isvarapranidhana, or surrender. All right, when I think about Sauca, or purity, I'm thinking of cleanliness of the body and purity of the mind, as the body and mind are independent. Purification of the body is a way of controlling the mind. External cleanliness, i.e. hygiene, on a daily basis, daily bathing, clean clothes, living in a clean house, on a subtle level, is purity of action or selflessness, a practice of selflessness. Isn't that interesting that just simply bathing regularly is an example of selflessness? Because it's an external consideration in consideration of yourself and your environment and others. And future burdens. Because when we think about disease process, for example, how many disease processes and disease conditions that their fundamental origin, the original cause of them, is poor hygiene? How about that? And this goes to so many things. This goes to toxicity. This goes to accumulation of waste products and toxicity. Okay? We could talk about hygiene as it relates to parasitic infections. We could. Just simply not washing your hands. As an example of why colds and flu are communicated through populations. The old cruise ship example of the virus that causes the explosive diarrhea. The rhinovirus that causes explosive diarrhea on a cruise ship, and how that's transmitted throughout the cruise ship is one person has the infection and they don't wash their hands. And everywhere they go on the cruise ship and everything they touch, they deposit the virus. The next person who comes and touches that, doorknob, handle, railing, chair arm, picks up the virus. Says an average person touches their face several hundred times a day. Now it's on your hand. It's guaranteed at some point in the day you're going to touch your face. Ta-da! There's the mechanism for it. Hygiene. That simply all it takes to interrupt that cycle, one, is keep the outside surfaces clean, housekeeping, and practice good personal hygiene. And now we know in an atmosphere of communicable disease that it's important to wash your hands. It's good hygiene. Okay? And we wonder, how does this get tied up into like a spiritual philosophy? I don't know about you, but I'll speak for myself. I have actually tried to meditate to be interrupted by the necessity to have explosive diarrhea. In other words, to interrupt my meditation, to jump up and run to the Hong Nam, run to the toilet, because all of a sudden my stomach decided to lose its mind without agreement, without, like, oh, come on now. No, tell me it's not true. And the stomach's like, yeah, whatever. Meditation's meditation. Meditate on the throne. Meditate on this. And so, for example, there is a correlation between hygiene and meditation. How about that? And the ancients knew this. That's why the ancient spiritual communities were the first places where people practiced indoor plumbing. It wasn't in the households of people where these concepts were refined and developed. It was in the spiritual temples, in the sacred areas, in the sacred places. Because that's where this concept, cleanliness is next to godliness, comes from. It is association of that there is a correlation between good personal hygiene and the health that that engenders and your ability to what? Contemplate. Your ability to meditate. Your ability to have a clean and clear mind without confusion and distraction. Your ability to think of other things than how bad you feel. The ancients knew this. They knew it. And they tried to pass this on to us, these ideas. And actually, most natural medicine, I'm only saying most because I don't know all natural medicine. Yes, I've studied much in many different cultures. That doesn't really mean anything in the big picture. I'd still have to say there are more cultures of medicine tradition that I have never personally practiced or experienced than the ones I have. I could give you one really big example. The mother of all Oriental medicine is Tibetan and Mongolian medicine. So if I really, really wanted to get to the roots of Oriental medicine, I would go to Tuva, Mongolia, and go to medical school in Tuva, Mongolia, and I would get a dose of the mother of Ayurveda, the mother of Chinese medicine, the way the Tuvans, the Mongolian and the Tibetans who also share that area, the way that they practice medicine. That would be the oldest, truest, most authentic medicine that I could find. Well, I haven't worked it up yet to be able to do that. I've heard about it, I've talked about it, I read a little bit about it. I went and listened to some Tuvan musicians who sang about it, but I haven't really studied it. Well, I'm sure there are many cultures that I haven't mastered their medical culture, don't even suspect what they have or haven't, and probably more than I know altogether. Okay? However, all the systems I have studied share one of many things in common, but one thing they all share in common is this concept of hygiene as being part of the disease process, no matter what. Okay? And how about this? Living in a city, living in a polluted, developed area, the diseases that are common to those areas is a matter of hygiene. Because they are dirty. We use words for the dirty: congested, polluted, toxic. Okay? But the ancients, in fact, the ancient rishis in the Charaka Samhita, it talks a little bit about how, Atraveda, how a group of the rishi doctors got together to discuss what they perceived as epidemics on the horizon. And they got together to discuss this new thing called a village. And how if people actually bought into this and started moving into villages, that there were going to be whole new pathways of disease. Because the one thing you cannot do with a village is keep it clean. Villages are dirtier than homesteads. Mostly. Because everyone assumes that someone else is going to clean it up. At least when you're on your own, you're not under that illusion. But when you live in a city, everybody assumes somebody else is going to clean it up. Well, if everybody assumes that, then that's what looks like a city. It looks like it's not very clean. Okay? That's a hygiene issue, which means it's also a health issue. Hygiene and health, same but different. Then we talk about the second niyama, Santosha, or contentment. It's more than a passive state of mind, it's a virtue to be actively cultivated in order to free the mind from the effects of pleasure and pain. It's about recognizing happiness in the now, not when this or that occurs, or that it only occurs when pleasant situations are experienced. It's the idea that you can cultivate a state of mind and a way of being in yourself that is buffered from what happens to you. So Elizabeth looks at me one way, I'm really happy. An hour later, she looks at me another way, I'm not happy anymore. I have experienced that. So when I think about it, I want to think about, is it possible for me to cultivate a state of mind where I am well and I'm happy regardless of what Elizabeth's face is doing at any particular time? And the ancient rishis have led me to the possibility that yes, it is possible. But obviously it will take some work. Okay, the next niyamas is tapas. People, usually in yoga communities, they talk a lot about tapas. Okay, and in my community, we talk a lot about tapas and where can we get some. No pun intended. If you ever go to Cafe Iberico in Chicago, you'll be ruined. Ruined. You'll be looking for tapas the rest of your life. Okay? But now here's tapas is austerity. So it's appropriate. It means literally to burn. That's what the word means. It means to burn it up. In yogic terms, tapas burn off all desires by means of discipline, purification, and penance. And when austerity is perfected, one achieves control over the body and senses without attachment to the austerities themselves. Okay? To burn off. All right. The way we interpret that is to actually practice the discipline that you say you believe that you follow. To actually practice it as if you really believe it. And that requires effort. And that requires discipline. And sometimes that looks like you're doing things that you don't want to do at the moment because you have a higher commitment. And the difference between the comfort of you're doing what you want to do and the discomfort of working through an issue because you committed to it creates friction. And this friction is the fire that burns off the tapas. Do you follow me? See, if I'm always on cruise mode and I go with the flow, or like Jim Hightower says, even a dead fish can swim downstream. That it takes effort and energy to maintain. It takes effort and energy to swim upstream. And so a dead fish, another way of saying it is even a dead fish can go with the flow. Even a dead fish can go with the flow. Okay? So we want to not always go with the flow. And sometimes our discipline and our commitments don't go with the flow. In fact, sometimes they look like we're standing still in the current, and sometimes it looks like we're bucking the current. In fact, we're going exactly the opposite way that the current is going. And see, the difference between going with the flow and the struggle to have integrity and to be yourself and to do the work that you need to do to become the possible person that you could be, that's what creates friction. And that friction is the fire that forms the self. So if you really are comfortable with your daily meditation, then your meditation, chances are, is no longer beneficial for you. At the moment, it becomes entirely comfortable, like an old, comfortable pair of shoes. You know, just before they wear out, when they're just right. Okay? Actually, that's when you need to be looking for new shoes. Because you know what? They are going to die. They are. They are, and unless you're still in the frame of mind that duct tape is a form of shoe repair. Okay? Still talking about niyamas. Swadhyaya, or study. Self-inquiry, reflecting deeply on the question of who am I? Study by oneself or a teacher, study with the necessity to review and evaluate our progress. at least once a day, everyone should ask themselves, who am I? Or a version. I'm not saying that's the only question. It's an existential exercise, by definition. Okay? Why am I here? Who am I? Why am I here? Because every day you want to confirm that you're where you're supposed to be. Every day you want to go through some process of validation and confirmation that your life has meaning. And so over time, instead of just looking at your life like it's like an unknown blur, that eventually you can get to a place and you look at your life and it actually makes sense. And also, you notice trajectories and inclinations, wheels within wheels, and perhaps over time you start to understand what is true to your nature and what is tangential. What are the kinds of things that will take you away from your good life? And to recognize them earlier and earlier and earlier so that you have less tangential evolution and can sort of remain in some semblance of integrity according to your true nature. Isvarapranidhana, or the art of surrender, that's a Niyama. Recognition that the limited ego, self, is an illusion. Channeling of energies towards the realization of truth. One who sees the self in all beings and who has surrendered the ego of being the doer is a true practitioner. Now, a lot of times in our school we come to this conversation from the idea of many I's, and that there is no singular I when you say the word I. Because unless you've really been working on yourself in a very specific way for an extended period of time, when you say the word I at this particular minute and you say the word I an hour from now, it's two different people talking. For example, it could be little things. This is where you see this dramatically, little things. Someone says, it's really good for the kitchen to be clean. Everybody nods their head and goes, yeah, clean kitchen. Yeah, it's a good thing. And so we really want people to step up, perhaps to even volunteer to be part of the project of keeping it clean. I'll do it. And then at some future time, 7 minutes from then, sometimes 8, but let's, between 7 and 8 minutes later, there's the dirty kitchen, and all the eyes have something else to do that's more important. Or, then we have even better, the eye that wanted to do it still's not in the room. He left immediately as soon as it said, okay, I'm on it. Left immediately. And so, but you notice, so it's not like you're going to say, no, I'm not going to do it now. I know, because you kind of hear the echo of your voice. It's still ringing from the rafters that just 5 minutes ago you said you would do it. Happily, because it's a joy of life, because you really believe in the octave, okay? And then what happens is, so you kind of catch yourself, but you do it, but you get the resistant grumbling eye to do it. So it still gets done. So technically, you met your agreement. You didn't say, like when you volunteered, you didn't say, I'll do it badly. I'll do it grumbly. You didn't volunteer. You didn't say, I'll do it resentful with constant under-the-breath criticism of all the other eyes who are not standing right beside me at this minute because they are not as disciplined as I am. So that's not actually what you said. And that wasn't the I that agreed to it. It's a completely different personality. And in those little things, you can see the many I's. Because they are different personalities. So the self, what is the self? There's no self. So what we say is you got to find one to have one. You want to have a self? Great. Ambitious. find one eye that it hangs around more than the others, and that's a good starting place. Because as long as every minute you're somebody else, there is no self that you're working on. So a lot of the exercises that we do about holding attention and crafting the ability to hold a long thought are about that. Because whatever is that capacity within you is more authentic and more true than all the other parts. When I say things like, that eye has the attention span of a gnat. Okay? That is not the eye you want your soul development to be, for that eye to be in charge of. Why? Because it's got the attention span of a gnat. I want another eye to be in charge of my soul development. I want an eye, or how about this? Not even an eye. How about a group of eyes? Maybe that's actually more accurate. We work with aggregates of ego constructs that have similar goals and similar resonance. I find those parts and feed them. And then between them, they can sustain a long thought. Because to craft a soul, in my opinion, requires a little bit of effort, sustained over a period of time. And that's not really accurate the way I said it, to craft a soul, because you already have a soul that is infinite and which has an existence outside of the limitations of time and space. What I'm trying to do is get in touch with it in real time. And I've been led by my ancient forefathers to believe that it's possible. Allegedly. But just because some ancient sacred person became transfigured doesn't mean that you're going to become transfigured. Doesn't mean that I'm going to become transfigured. Just because Jesus walked on the water doesn't mean I'm going to walk on the water. It means that I might. It doesn't mean I will. And to even come close to even a metaphor of whatever that represents is going to take a little bit of effort. And, in my opinion, a lot of help. A lot of help. So, I surrender my ideas about the ego and the attachment to them. And the first exercise that I recommend is consider that the ego is not real. In fact, then think if personality is a reflection of the ego, then the personality is not real. And then have a thought, if virtually everything about us is defined by our personality, then virtually everything about us is not real. But something might be. So the trick is, over time we want to try and sort out, how can we not be so distracted by the not real that we might actually be able to see past it or through it, to see the real, okay? And another reference from the Bible today, Saul of Tarsus, after his epiphany of seeing the Spirit of Christ, explains that it was as if I saw through a glass darkly, and now I can see. And so it was like previous to having this epiphany of transformation, he could see and he thought he saw the world as it really was. But in comparison to what was the sight of an enlightened being, compared to the previous, it was as if looking through a very dark glass. And so when we talk about the ego and we see ourselves and we are defined by what the ego defines what we see, then we are not seeing our true self. We're seeing a shadow of our true self. That's what the teachings say. Okay, Daniel, stop that. Let's take a break. Number 3 is asana. Asana is a concept of practical exercise, both for yourself and for others. SomaVeda is a practice, martial arts, hatha yoga. The concept is to invest in personal development for yourself and for others. develop yourself and others, keep yourself as healthy as possible. Asana is sometimes referred to as the third limb of yoga. The word is generally translated as a posture or seat, with the main reason to prepare the body for sitting for many hours in meditation and shifting and awakening the Kundalini energy. I've mentioned this in other classes, certainly in other parts of classes, that in one sense the origin of organized medicine, specifically when I'm talking about traditional Thai medicine or Buddhist medicine, that it was a very logical thing to develop systematic practice of medicine. So let's go back in time and just for a minute imagine that you lived 2,000, 2,500 years ago, and you heard that there was a discipline being taught, an art being practiced that could, in a single lifetime, lead to elevation or enlightenment, or at least inner peace. Okay? And so it's in one spot in the world where this teaching is. Just one. There's a charismatic teacher, and there's a group of people who follow the teachings of that charismatic teacher, and you have to travel to have proximity because it's geographic. This teaching is geographically located. So you hear about it, and so you go, I'm going to go learn this discipline that I've heard of. I don't even know what it is, but I want some. Enough that I'm going to leave my family, I'm going to leave my friends, I'm going to leave my town, I'm going to leave my farm, I'm going to leave my job and my fun and my activities and my hidden valley, and I'm going to go to where this teaching is, and so off you go. Now let's imagine from the opposite perspective of the site, the place where the teaching's happening, the center, okay? And people start to come who want to learn. And as they come, as they arrive, they're coming from everywhere, all ages, all shapes and sizes, and all physical conditions. Now let's say one of the conditions for this practice is that you have to be able to sit in one spot long enough to craft a long thought. And that there are many preparatory exercises and there are many supportive disciplines, both yogic disciplines of physical exercise, maybe martial arts and others, but which are all part of this practice of this meditation or meditation practice. And so here comes newbies, here come the new people, and they show up. And once in a while, one of the new people is actually healthy. But by and large, the vast number of people who show up who want access to this teaching, they're not healthy. They're not healthy in mind, they're not healthy in body, they're not healthy in emotions, they're not healthy in spirit. In other words, they show up with whatever they had, with whatever they brought with them. Whatever baggage, whatever parasites, whatever. So now imagine that your first lesson, like for example in traditional Vipassana training in Thailand, the first Vipassana training is a 28-day silent retreat. Okay? The first class is a 28-day silent retreat. Okay? And 18 hours a day you're sitting. 18 hours a day you're sitting. So guess what? Even today, in really traditional Bhavana schools in Thailand, the dropout rate with new students who go to those schools to do their very first training in Vipassana meditation is like 90%, even higher than 90%. One, people aren't physically healthy. You can't sit for 12 or 14 or 18 hours a day if you're not perfectly healthy. What if you have a bad back? What if you have a bum knee? What if you have a bad ankle? What if you have a shoulder problem? What if you have migraine headaches? What if you have parasites? And so you have problems with your gut and with your bowel. What if? What if you have arthritis? What if you have diabetes? What if you have? What if? Okay? And so those have direct, concrete impact on your ability to sit. All right? They also have direct and concrete impact on your ability to do the exercises. What if the exercise in Vipassana is walking? One of the meditation exercises is walking. Okay? What if you can't walk? What if you can't stand? What if the way you got there was on a wheelchair or on the back of a cart or on the back of some friend's shoulder? And then as soon as you get there, they tell you, well, the only way to do this meditation is you have to walk. And you can't walk. Okay? What if on the way to the meditation you were attacked by bandits and you were wounded? You survived. And you managed to make your progress and you got to the class, but you're wounded. Maybe you have an infection. Maybe you actually, maybe you have a wound, okay? And think of all the different things that an average group of just ordinary people who just decided to go somewhere and show up at one place and do one thing, that what condition they would show up in. And then think if the discipline that was already there was very strict. Was very strict, okay? Well, but part of their tradition was the practical expression of generosity and compassion. And so when people would show up and they didn't have the capacity to actually participate, somebody had to help them. And so they had to organize a whole filtering system, which is called a system of medicine, which was to take in the public, assess them, give them the therapy that they needed, give them the remedial exercises that they needed in order to get them in shape, mind, body, and spirit, to start day one in meditation and have even a little bit of a chance of being successful. And over time, that's why there was always a hospital function that was within and adjacent to the temple function. There was. And and some of the monks, instead of tending to their self-interest all day and every day, and that's, I'm not here to take care of you, I'm here to become enlightened. They looked at it and they said, actually, my ultimate enlightenment is contingent on yours. In other words, they also had a theory, a philosophy, if you will, that no one gets out until everyone gets out. No one's free until everyone's free. And the ones who got that the quickest would be the first to volunteer to help. See, if I absolutely understand that my personal evolution as a conscious being is utterly and completely dependent on the slowest of the slow's progress, you know what happens the second I have that thought? I'll roll up my sleeves and get real helpful. Come on. You can do it. Come on. Let's clean that up. Let's, stretch. We need to get you on a diet. We need to do a detox. We need to balance that energy. We need to fix that broken leg. Can't do meditation, seated meditation, with a broken leg. Okay? And so it was inevitable that the medical function would become a big part of their asana practice. See, asana is the physical practice, the external physical practice. Same thing with martial arts. That's why martial arts was always part of these healing disciplines. Kalari Payat in India, Gabi Kabong in Thailand, Tai Chi, Chon, Fa, Bak Gua, Sing Yi, and Kung Fu in China, okay? Kali in Filipino Hilat, okay? And I'm also quite sure, even though I don't know the name, and I've actually asked the universe to bring me a name, but the name of the martial arts traditions that were practiced by the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayans, because certainly they had them, and they would have been quite sophisticated, because all spiritual communities in the past had an external defensive mechanism, or they wouldn't have survived. Okay? Just like if you don't have an internal practice of hygiene and an external practice of hygiene, you won't survive. You'll become toxic. You'll become auto-intoxic. you will be infested with parasites and you will waste away. So you have to have these things if you're going to survive. Spiritual disciplines have the same needs as our physical body. How about that? And this is where we get into this idea of asanas. But develop yourself and others, but develop yourself for others. And so keep trying to come back to this idea. The reason why I do any yoga at all is really only so much for me. The reason why I do any yoga at all is so that I stay relatively healthy and strong and able and agile so that I can be of service to others. That's my primary motivation. When I was younger, now I want to say this, when I was in my 20s and I was in my 30s, my yoga practice was really for me. And it was performance. It was performance oriented. I wanted to look good and be good in front of others. And so that's why I practice. And it was highly motivational, and I practiced very, very hard. Okay? But over time I realized that practice for self-aggrandizement, practice for self-elevation, practice for self-importance was actually all practice for self. And what I wanted to do was cultivate a practice that was not for the self, but was for others, because I wanted to cultivate a diminishment of the self, i.e. the ego. And asanas are really about keeping yourself healthy as possible, because your health is an absolute limitation on your creativity, capacity, and motivation to help other people. Okay? Number 4 is pranayama. Pranayama is breath science, or the facilitation of 5 pranas. And we'll learn later that there are 5 different kinds of prana. Pranayama, traditionally called the 4th limb, okay, is practiced in many forms, is generally defined as breath control. The word pranayama is made up of 2 roots, prana plus ayami. Prana means vital energy or life force. This life force exists within all things. Pranayama is more than breathing exercises, providing oxygen to the body for increasing energy. It works on a deeper level. Ayama is referred to as extension or expansion. Pranayama has its mysterious power to soothe and revitalize a tired body, a flagging spirit, or an unruly mind. The mind is calmed, rejuvenated, and uplifted. The focused breath also leads us internally to a deep level of meditation. One of the teachings that I personally choose to emphasize in SomaVeda is this idea that since prana is my vital life force, and what I'm trying to do with my clients is to support the increase of their vital life force, that everything I do is an extension of the vital life force, the breath. And so every conscious application of pressure, my visualization is an extension of my breath. I don't push on people, I don't pull people, I don't prod, squeeze, poke, jab, scrape, twist, fold, spindle, or mutilate. I extend my prana, I extend my breath, and I'm constantly working to reaffirm that visualization. 1, it automatically keeps me breathing. So I never run out of gas. So you stop breathing, you run out of gas. And when I breathe, and when I'm always breathing, I also find that my clients breathe, and they're always breathing. And so this breath focus and occasional breath coaching, where we're specifically giving instructions, breathe here now, be here now with your breath. Let it go.